They shoved her to the ground, tased her, called her a threat just because she was old, black, and standing tall in a grocery store. But what those cops didn't know was that the woman they humiliated was once the deadliest Navy SEAL in U.S. history, a ghost in classified missions, a commander who trained warriors, and now awakened by injustice, she was done being silent. What began as a routine act of cruelty would ignite a national reckoning because this time the system picked a fight with the wrong woman. And she wasn't alone. They shoved me. I wasn't even 3 feet past the grocery store entrance when I felt the cold jab of a nightstick against my ribs. "Ma'am, you need to step outside," one of them barked. He was young, white buzz-cut muscles under his standard-issue armor, but his eyes were small like someone used to bullying without consequence. I had barely touched the cart. "Is there a problem, officer?" I asked, steady. Calm. Always calm. That was something that was beaten into me in a very different kind of uniform. The second cop, slightly older badge tilted from where mirrored shades, even though the sun was hiding behind clouds, joined in, stepping around me like I was a roach on the floor of their pristine store. Store policy. No loitering. And no recording. Leave. Now. They didn't know me. They just saw a small, thin black woman in a patched coat and a faded Marine Corps hat. To them, I looked like someone's tired old grandma who probably got lost on her way to the pharmacy. But I wasn't lost. I was remembering. This was where James and I used to shop every Sunday after church. He'd hold my hand in the parking lot like we were still young lovers. We used to laugh here. I hadn't been back in years, not since the funeral. I'm not recording anything I told them, and I'm not loitering. I came to buy a bag of rice and some chicken thighs. The young one narrowed his eyes. "Then why are you wearing a body cam?" I blinked. "What?" He pointed to the small black object clipped to the front of my coat. It wasn't a camera. It was a medal my Navy Cross mounted discreetly worn because it gave me strength when I walked alone. I never took it off. "That's not?" I began, but the older cop had already reached for his taser. I said, "Leave the premises, now. Before this gets ugly." I stood still. That's when he drew it and fired. The prongs hit me square in the chest and my knees gave out. The floor rushed up like a wave. I barely heard the screaming around me, the gasps, the manager yelling, "Don't. She hasn't done anything before." His voice was silenced by a barked, "Stay back." They didn't see me as a person. They saw a threat because I stood tall. Because I didn't cower. Because I wouldn't drop my eyes and shuffle away. They didn't know the kind of hell I'd lived through in jungles, deserts, and oceans. They didn't know who I was. My name is Eleanor Ruth Briggs. I am 72 years old. I live alone in a small brick house in Southside Memphis. I tend my garden volunteer at the VA hospital and keep to myself. My neighbors know me as Ms. Ellie, the nice old lady who bakes pound cake for the kids and tells stories about her James. But before I was Ms. Ellie, I was Commander Eleanor R. Briggs, United States Navy SEAL codename Spectre. The first and only black woman to complete Bud S training in the early 80s, classified missions across 3 continents. 5 confirmed hostage rescues, over 24 commendations, and 3 bullet wounds that still ache when the rain rolls in. I was a ghost, a myth, a whisper of death in places where no one dared breathe. But they didn't know that. To them, I was just an old black woman in a grocery store. I woke up in a holding cell, cold metal bench. 1 flickering light bulb. A camera mounted in the corner watching. I could still feel the ghost of the taser's electricity in my chest, like it had awakened something I had buried for years. I touched the bruises. I sat upright. I waited. They didn't book me. They didn't call anyone. No rights were read, just silence. It was hours later, maybe 3, maybe 5, when the door finally opened and a man walked in. Not a cop. He was federal. Clean black suit, crisp white shirt, a thin leather folder in hand, and no expression on his face. "Miss Eleanor Briggs," he asked, but he didn't need confirmation. He already knew. I met his eyes. Yes, he sat across from me, opened the folder, and pushed a photo toward me. It was me, in full uniform, saluting. Behind me, the tattered remnants of an insurgent camp, smoke still rising. A classified photo from a mission never acknowledged. "Why are you here?" I asked him. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he closed the folder slowly, reverently, and said, "Because you just became the biggest liability in this city's police department. And the Pentagon just got a call from someone who recognized your name on the intake logs." I leaned back, my body sore, but my mind sharp. "They're scared, aren't they?" He nodded. "The video's gone viral. People are angry, veterans, civilians. And now every Marine alive who's ever served under your command is calling for blood." Outside the window, I saw blue lights spinning. Reporters were gathering at the gate. "They're going to ask you to speak," he said. I looked at my hands. Old hands, veined and wrinkled, but still steady. I didn't survive wars, I said, to die silent in a grocery store aisle. The day I was released, I walked out through the front doors of the precinct not as a victim, but as a reminder. The cops who tased me were nowhere to be seen. Internal Affairs was crawling all over the department. The mayor's office had already called twice, and waiting for me outside the gate was a wall of support young Marines in dress blues, old friends from the Navy neighbors with hand-painted signs. But it was one man, an amputee in a wheelchair with a silver star on his chest, who saluted me first. I saluted back, because the fight wasn't over, because they still didn't understand. I wasn't just an old lady. I was the war. They thought I'd disappear. They thought tasing an old woman in a grocery store would be just another quiet scandal buried beneath reports and bureaucracy. Just another footnote no one would read. But I've buried too many brothers in silence to go quietly. Not anymore. The news hit national airwaves within 24 hours. Elderly woman tased by police identified as decorated Navy SEAL commander. Spectre is real, and she's furious. Memphis police under fire after brutal arrest of war hero. I didn't do interviews, not yet. I wasn't ready to speak, but I did return to my garden the next morning. I sat in the sun hands in the soil, pulling weeds from around the tomatoes James and I once planted. The media drones flew overhead. Cars slowed in front of the house. Someone left flowers by my mailbox. A little girl down the street dropped off a card written in red crayon. "Thank you for being brave." I hadn't even started. 2 days later, the police chief called. "Ms. Briggs," he began, his voice tight. "I want to personally apologize for what happened. The officers involved have been placed on leave pending investigation. I assure you this is not how we treat our citizens." I said nothing. He continued. "There's a lot of attention on the department now. If you'd be willing to meet with us, perhaps speak to the community." I cut him off. "You mean be your PR shield?" He faltered. No, not at all, ma'am. I buried men who bled out in the dirt for the right to walk into a grocery store without being assaulted. Don't call me to fix what your system broke." Click. That evening, I did make a call to Corporal Leo Simmons, my former spotter, now a civil rights lawyer in Atlanta. He didn't ask why I was calling. He'd already seen the video. "I'm flying out tonight," he said. "You ready to go to war, Commander?" "No," I said. I already fought that war. I'm ready to expose the cowards hiding behind badges and silence. We started gathering, old unit brothers, former SEALs, Marines, Army Rangers, civilians I once pulled from rubble overseas, people who remembered Spectre, people who owed me their lives, people who were tired of being quiet. Leo arranged a town hall meeting at Booker T. Washington High School, the same auditorium where I once spoke to students about honor, discipline, and peace. Now I would speak of betrayal. The room was packed, standing room only. Churchgoers, veterans, young black kids wearing hoodies and older white men with worn hats that said, Vietnam Vet. It wasn't about politics anymore. It was about dignity. Leo took the stage. First, laid out the facts, then played the footage, the taser, the fall, my face hitting the tile. The room gasped. A woman sobbed. A man swore. Then he handed me the mic. I stood slow. My bones ached, but my voice was steel. I didn't come here to tell you about pain, I began. I came to remind you that silence is the deadliest weapon ever built. It's killed more men than bullets, more hope than war. I told them what it felt like to wear the uniform, to be invisible overseas, and still come home and be feared on American soil. They thought I was weak because I'm old, and black and quiet. They forgot I made silence my weapon. They forgot who trained me. They forgot what I've survived. I didn't come back from combat to kneel in my own country. By the end, no one clapped. They stood, every single person. No one shouted, just tears, hands over hearts, and the stillness of truth cutting through decades of lies. 3 days later, the 2 cops who tased me, Officer Derek Cole and Sergeant Ryan Maxley, were suspended without pay. Then came the body cam footage. They'd turned off their cams before engaging me. Against protocol, they lied in their report, claimed I had threatened them, that I reached for something on my belt. They said I resisted, but the store's surveillance caught it all. They tased an unarmed woman in her 70s because they could, until they couldn't. Backlash rolled in like thunder. Veterans groups demanded federal charges. Congressmen called for oversight. The Pentagon issued a rare statement of support. And the VA department offered to name their new facility after me. I declined the naming. I don't want a building, I told them. I want justice. And I want it public. But the storm hadn't passed. One night after a speaking event downtown, I returned to find my garden ripped up. Tomatoes crushed, fence slashed. Spray paint on the brick wall, die slow. I didn't cry. I didn't flinch. I walked back inside, turned off the porch light, and picked up the landline. Leo, I said they want a war after all, he replied without hesitation. Then we show them what happens when you poke a ghost. The next morning, I held a press conference on my lawn. With cameras rolling, I stood in front of the damage. In uniform. Medals gleaming in the sun. Leo stood behind me. So did a dozen former operatives. A rainbow of veterans. Black, white, Asian, Latino, all standing in silence. I am not afraid, I said. I buried my fear in sand and steel decades ago. But this hate, this rot inside our systems, that's what terrifies me for your children, so I will not stop. Not until these officers are held accountable. Not until this department is reformed. Not until no child has to wonder if their grandmother will come home from the store alive. And then I dropped the real bomb. I have begun filing federal lawsuits. Not just for myself. For every voice ignored. Every body brutalized. And I will win. Because I'm not alone. Because we never are. Not when we rise together. That night there was a knock at my door. not police. A woman, mid-30s, light-skinned, nervous. "My name is Ava," she said. "My mama." She was tased, too. 6 months ago. She never woke up. No one believed me. But now they might. I took her hand. "Come inside," I said. "You're not alone anymore." I kept a journal. I began the habit during my first deployment, Operation Urgent Fury, Grenada, 1983. Each name, each date, each loss. Soldiers I couldn't save. Civilians we left behind. Orders that haunted me. After I retired, I stopped writing in it. Or tried to. For decades, I let the silence cover the names like dust. But after what they did to me in that grocery store, I pulled that notebook out from the drawer beneath James's flag and wrote 4 words in bold black ink. Ava's mother, Gloria Fields. Ava sat on my porch that morning, sipping tea with shaky hands. She was young, but tired bags under her eyes, the kind that only grief could carve. She hadn't stopped trembling since the night before. "My mom was picking up my daughter from school," she whispered. "She was parked outside for 2 minutes too long. They told her to move." She asked for a moment. They tased her before she finished the sentence. She had a pacemaker. I listened. They said it was a mistake. "Regretful, but lawful," they said. "No charges, no investigation. They didn't even let us see the footage." But I saw the officer's name. She looked up at me, eyes red. Sergeant Ryan Maxley, the same man who hit me in the chest with a taser cartridge. I leaned back in my rocking chair, the air heavy between us. "This city's full of graves that don't speak," I said. "But I do. And now, so do you." Leo and I got to work. We put out a call for silence breakers. Women, men, elders, children. Anyone who had experienced violence, abuse, humiliation by the same officers or others protected by the same rotten shield. We didn't expect much. But within 48 hours we had over 300 stories. Mr. Tyrell Jensen, 67 years old, was choked by an officer for walking too slowly across Beale Street. Tasha Greer, 24, was slammed into a patrol car after asking why her cousin was being frisked. Malcolm Trent, 15, was thrown to the sidewalk because a cop claimed his hoodie was threatening. Mrs. Eloise Nwoko, 80, was handcuffed in her wheelchair because she refused to show ID outside a pharmacy. Names, dates, times, photos, medical bills, silence, all connected, many to the same precinct, all ignored. Until now, I stood in the center of my living room with those stories in hand, printouts, letters, screenshots, and felt the weight of them all. I didn't cry. I'd bled too much in my life to cry for every injustice. But my hands tightened around the stack. "This is war," I said to Leo. He nodded. "And we've got ammunition now." We filed class action civil rights lawsuits in federal court. I was named as lead plaintiff. Ava joined. So did Mr. Jensen Malcolm's mother and Eloise's granddaughter. The suit named not just Cole and Maxley, but their commanding officers, the police union, the city, and internal review boards who signed off on abuse like it was routine paperwork. And just like that, the department went on the offensive. They accused me of manufacturing outrage. They leaked edited footage, cropped and silent, trying to make me look aggressive. They sent drones to hover over my house at night. One even left a dead squirrel on my doorstep. I've faced death squads in the jungles of Honduras. I've crawled through sniper fields in Kandahar. I wasn't about to flinch because a coward left a dead rodent by my begonias. But it wasn't just me they wanted to silence. Ava started receiving strange phone calls, silent ones. Her car tires were slashed. Malcolm's mom was fired from her job. Mr. Jensen's home was raided under a fake drug tip. They were trying to crush us, so I called in a favor. You don't spend decades in black ops without collecting favors. I made one encrypted call. 4 hours later, 3 black SUVs with no plates rolled into Memphis and parked outside my house. Out stepped a team veterans, all of them. Marines, SEALs, a former NSA analyst. People who owed me. People I'd saved. People who knew that while war ends on paper, injustice lingers in shadows. They set up surveillance, protected our plaintiffs, backed up our data to foreign servers. And then they uncovered something we didn't expect. A whistleblower. His name was Officer Luis Ortega, a patrol cop with 12 years on the force. Latino, soft-spoken, honest. He reached out to Leo through a burner phone and met us in the back of a church late at night. "I can't keep watching this happen," he said, his voice cracking. "They falsify reports. They share body cam blind spots. They keep a private Slack channel where they joke about the people they've hurt." He slid a USB across the table. "It's all here." The room held its breath. We uploaded the contents that night. Dozens of recordings, chats, internal memos, even a spreadsheet labeled Targeted Citizens with tags like Aggressive, Frequent Flyer Resistor, and a special code B15, which according to Ortega stood for Black. Elderly, alone. My name was on that list. So was Ava's mom. So was Mr. Jensen. So were over 60 others. We leaked it. Everything. To CNN, to MSNBC, to independent journalists. And within hours, the news exploded like napalm across the country. Secret code for targeting black elders uncovered in Memphis police leak. FMR Navy SEAL brings entire system to its knees. Whistleblower confirms official lists of targeted civilians. The police commissioner resigned. The mayor called an emergency press conference. DOJ launched a federal investigation, and the White House issued a statement calling it a turning point in the American justice system. But I wasn't done, because there were still people hurting, because Gloria Fields was still in the ground, because Ava still woke up screaming, because no one apologized. Not really. One night I sat with Ava on my porch again. We listened to the cicadas, the quiet. "Why you?" she asked. "Why did they pick you?" I looked at her steady. "Because they didn't think I'd fight back. Because they thought I was tired, alone, forgotten." I turned to the dark horizon. But ghosts don't fade. They haunt. And when they've got nothing left to lose, they burn the whole system down. The night before the congressional hearing, I found James's old dog tags in the box beneath our wedding photo. I hadn't touched them in years. They still smelled like the desert sun and salt water, and that strange oily steel of military sweat. I wrapped them around my palm, closed my eyes, and remembered him saluting me at my retirement ceremony. The quiet respect in his smile, the pride, the way he whispered, "You're not done yet." He was right. The uniform may come off, but the oath doesn't. It stays in your blood like a second heartbeat. They flew me to D.C. in a chartered jet provided by the National Veterans Alliance. First class, escort waiting. No metal detectors, no questions. It was strange being treated with reverence now. I didn't want special treatment. I wanted accountability. I stood in the Capitol chamber the next morning beneath that massive dome of power and history. The press packed in the back, senators lining the front row with pens and unread faces. Some looked genuinely concerned. Others wore the masks of politics. I raised my hand, swore to tell the truth, and then I did. All my life I've served this country. I began voice low but unshaking. I've crawled through enemy tunnels. I've pulled wounded men from the jaws of death. I've earned my medals in silence. But back home, none of it mattered when I walked into a grocery store as a black woman in a coat that looked too old and a face that looked too tired. I was labeled, targeted, tased. I paused, not because I posed a threat, but because I reminded them that dignity can't be dictated by a badge. Gasps, silence. A pen clattered from someone's hand. I continued. Your systems protect predators. Your codes punish the quiet. And every time you turn a blind eye to injustice, you bury another name. But I came here to unbury them. I handed over the printed list. B-15 targets, 68 names, faces, dates, injuries. Some were dead. None had received justice. I could see some of the senators stiffen. One woman wiped a tear. One man folded his arms like he wished I'd just go back to my garden. But I wasn't here for their comfort. I was here for Gloria, for Ava, for the boy in the hoodie, for the woman in the wheelchair, for every invisible casualty of routine policing. After the hearing, I stepped outside to the marble steps. There were people waiting, hundreds, veterans, mothers, activists, reporters. Some held up signs that read, "We stand with Spectre." Others just nodded silently as I walked my hand over their hearts. One woman placed a photo in my hand. Her brother, dead in custody. 2006. She didn't say a word. She didn't need to. That night, the precinct in Memphis was placed under federal oversight. Maxley and Cole were arrested by U.S. Marshals on charges of civil rights violations. 4 supervisors resigned. Internal Affairs was dissolved. But the threats kept coming. 3 days later, someone tried to torch my house. It was 2 a.m. I was inside, reading through deposition transcripts, when I caught the flicker of firelight through my window. By the time I stepped onto the porch, the side of the house was already ablaze. They wanted to scare me. They failed. I didn't call 911. I called Ghost Team 1, my personal network of old operatives now working under Leo's NGO Justice for the Silent. They arrived before the fire trucks, contained the blaze, gathered footage, traced the arsonist's vehicle. A week later, a former cop fired 5 years earlier for assault was arrested in connection to the attack. The police department tried to distance themselves, deny ties, but a trail of donations linked him to a secret slush fund inside the officer union's PC. We exposed that too. It wasn't just about a taser anymore. It was about a cancer, and I was holding the scalpel. In one of the many interviews I reluctantly agreed to, the anchor asked me a question no one else had dared. "Commander Briggs, what do you say to those who ask why you didn't fight back in that store?" I looked her in the eye. Because sometimes the most powerful weapon is restraint. Let them write their own downfall. My job was to survive long enough to expose them. That clip went viral. Millions of shares. Memes. Young women started calling themselves Spectre's daughters. Veterans marched in silence. Civilians held candlelight vigils for the fallen on the B-15 list. What began as one story became a movement. But movements need roots, need endurance, need legacy. So I returned to Memphis, bought the empty lot next to my garden, and with help from Ava Leo and Ghost Team 1, we broke ground on the Spectre Foundation, a center for police accountability, a safe haven for victims, a museum of stories never told. Etched on the black granite wall outside were the names from the B-15 list, lit at night by soft gold lights, not to mourn, but to remember, to warn, to promise. One morning, a group of young cadets from the new Memphis Police Academy came to visit the center. All races, genders, nervous and hopeful. Their instructor whispered to me, They've been studying your case. It's part of the new ethics curriculum. I looked at them, faces fresh and eyes wide, and stepped forward. I told them, wear your badge like armor for the innocent, not a hammer for the weak. Protect the vulnerable. Question everything, especially yourselves. Then I pointed to the wall. Those names, make sure there's never another line added. I met the boy in silence. He stood just beyond the garden gate. One gray morning, his small hands gripping the bars like they were the only things keeping him upright. Maybe 12. Skinny. Ashen. His sneakers were soaked from dew. A threadbare hoodie clung to his shoulders. There was a quiet defiance in his eyes, but also something else. Something broken. "Miss Ellie?" he asked, voice soft as breath. "I'm Ellie," I said, stepping down from the porch. He pulled something from his pocket and held it out, a folded envelope stained and creased. My name was written on it in blocky pen. I took it carefully. Inside was a letter. No signature, no explanation. Just 5 lines. He saw your hearing. Said you were hope. His bruises came from them. Badge. 8726. They said don't tell. Now he won't wake up. My fingers curled around the paper. I looked back at the boy. "Who gave this to you?" "My brother," he whispered. "Before he went to sleep." His name was Terrence Holloway, 14 years old. Honor roll student. No record. No history of rebellion or crime. A week after my hearing, he was picked up by 2 patrol officers near a closed convenience store. They accused him of breaking and entering. He had no tools, no stolen items, no fingerprints on the door. He came home, bruised, bleeding from the ear. The hospital said head trauma. 2 days later, he slipped into a coma. His brother Malik had been carrying the letter ever since. I stared at the badge number. I didn't need a database to confirm it. Officer Derek Cole, one of the men who tased me. He was out on bail, waiting trial, still walking the streets, still in uniform, still hurting children. That night I didn't sleep. I walked the perimeter of my property like I used to patrol the edge of desert safe zones. Every shadow reminded me of combat. Every creak in the floorboards reminded me of loss. I hadn't felt that old fire in my blood since Kandahar. But this wasn't about vengeance. This was about the boy. The next morning, Leo and I went to the hospital. Terrence lay curled beneath a sea of wires and tubes, his tiny chest rising and falling beneath the slow rhythm of machines. His mother clutched his hand. Her eyes were hollow, but her grip was steel. She turned to me and said only, "You're the soldier." I said, "But I'm still fighting." She nodded once, tears slipping silently. We leaked the story. Photos of Terrence's injuries, medical reports, statements from witnesses who saw Cole slam him into the pavement. Malik's letter. The internet exploded. Asser's Justice for Terrence trended worldwide in 6 hours. Ava organized a candlelight march. Thousands came. Some carried signs with the boy's school portrait. Others held printed copies of Badge Duran Kaker 8-926. It wasn't just a name, now it was a brand. The mayor panicked. Outrageous, he called it. Unverified, said the union. An attack on good policing, said Cole's lawyer. But then someone hacked into the precinct's security system. Footage surfaced. Cole shoving Terrence, kicking him after he fell, screaming words I won't repeat. And at the end of the video, clear as day, Terrence's limp body being dragged like a bag of trash into the squad car. This time there was no defense. Cole was arrested again, no bail, charged with aggravated assault of a minor obstruction and tampering with evidence. But it wasn't enough, because he wasn't alone that night. Another officer stood just out of frame, watching, doing nothing. Badge not 912. I recognized it too. Sergeant Maxley. Leo and I called for federal charges against the entire department. Civil conspiracy. RICO-level investigations. And while the feds prepared indictments, I focused on Malik. He had stopped speaking after Terrence's hospitalization. Wouldn't eat, wouldn't sleep. His school called. His teachers were worried. His mother didn't know what to do. So I took him into the garden. I gave him gloves, a trowel, a patch of dry dirt. "Why do I have to do this?" he finally muttered. "Because sometimes the only way to fix what's broken is to plant something new." He scoffed, but he dug. And when he found a root buried deep and stubborn, he looked up and said, "This is hard." I smiled. Most things worth doing are. A week later, Terrence opened his eyes. Only for a few seconds. Only a flutter. But it was enough. The doctors called it a miracle. I called it purpose. That same day, I stood before the Memphis City Council. Ava beside me. Leo flanking. Malik sitting in the front row, hands clenched in his lap. I didn't bring a speech. I brought the list. The B-15. The list of every soul this system tried to bury. I laid it on the podium. "You want to fix policing in this city," I said. "Start by removing every name connected to these." The room was silent, and then Ava stood. She read her mother's name aloud. Then Malik rose and read Terrence's. Then Leo. Then, one by one, strangers, veterans, mothers, students. They filled the room with names like a roll call of the forgotten. The council voted unanimously. Reform passed. Immediate suspension of all officers under review. Mandatory external audits. Civilian oversight boards. A monument approved on city grounds to honor victims. That night, back in my garden, Malik asked me something I'll never forget. "Do you ever stop being scared?" I looked up from the soil and wiped my hands. "No," I said. "But I learned that fear isn't the end. It's the beginning of courage." He nodded, and for the first time, he smiled. The day I put on my uniform again, the house fell silent. I laid the fabric out across the bed like a memory unfolding. Navy blue, pressed. Medals gleaming like echoes of who I used to be. James's photo sat on the dresser beside a fresh vase of white lilies, watching me with that soft pride that had never faded, not even in death. It had been 21 years since I last wore this uniform. But the war had come home and ghosts don't retire. Ava knocked gently on my door. "They're ready," she said, voice tight with emotion. I turned cap in hand. "So are we." Downtown Memphis had never seen a procession like this. 3,000 veterans, hundreds of civilian survivors, 24 caskets carried by silent marchers empty, but each painted with a name from the B-15 list. Terrence, now conscious and able to speak again, led the march holding his brother Malik's hand. His head still bore a healing scar, and me, I walked at the front in full-dress uniform, not as a victim, as a commander. The city council, after public pressure and national attention, had ordered a public apology ceremony and truth hearing. But we weren't there to accept apologies. We were there to deliver justice. They gave me the mic. The crowd was silent. Cameras lined the rooftops. I took a breath and spoke, not as Eleanor Briggs the woman or Spectre the seal, but as someone who had seen what America looks like from both the battlefield and the supermarket floor. You can give medals, you can name buildings, but until you change the soul of the system that let this happen, none of it means a damn thing. I turned to face the uniformed officers standing behind the mayor. "I don't need you to kneel. I need you to stand for something." Then I turned to the crowd, because when you're born black in America, silence is lethal. And the only way to survive is to speak louder than the fear. I held up my dog tags. These don't belong to just me. They belong to every person who came home expecting freedom and found a taser instead. Applause. Not the polite kind, the kind that shakes walls, the kind that starts revolutions. Later that night, the city signed the Spectre Reform Act into law. Permanent Independent Civilian Review Board. Public release of all use of force footage. Ban on tasers for passive resistance. Mandatory implicit bias. Retraining and psychological evaluation every 6 months. Lifetime bans on rehiring officers fired for misconduct. They also officially retired badge number 8726 and 90s and 12. Not in honor, in disgrace. Their numbers would never be reassigned. A memorial plaque would read, "In memory of the justice denied under these numbers, never again." Back at my house, Ghost Team 1 was packing up. The mission was over. Leo stood by the truck arms crossed eyes on me like the old days. "You good?" he asked. "I'm alive," I said. That's more than they expected. Ava walked up holding a folder. Inside was something I never asked for. A presidential pardon for classified actions committed in defense of national security. "You don't need this anymore," she said. But they needed to admit it. I smiled. Too little, too late. Still, I folded it carefully and tucked it into the drawer beneath James's flag. Not because I needed validation, but because my story would live longer than I would. That night, Malik sat on the porch beside me silent. Then he asked Ms. Ellie if I wanted to. Could I join the Navy? I turned to him slowly. "You don't have to wear a uniform to fight for something. But if you do it better, be for the right reasons." He nodded, then added, "I want to protect people, like you did." My heart twisted in that old quiet way. I reached for his hand. "Then I'll be proud to stand at your swearing in." 3 days later, a statue was unveiled in front of the new Spectre Center for Civil Rights and Veteran Justice. Not of me standing tall in uniform, but of an old woman kneeling in a grocery aisle, her head still high as officers pointed weapons at her. A plaque read, "They mistook her silence for surrender. They forgot who taught America how to fight." The sun rose slow that morning. It poured gold across the porch, catching on the medals that hung inside the window, polished now not for pride, but remembrance. I sat in my rocker, sipping coffee wrapped in a shawl Ava knitted me last Christmas. It was quiet, peaceful, but not still. No peace like this wasn't free. It was forged. Earned. That morning marked 1 year since the march. 1 year since Malik stood in the city square and read his brother's name before a sea of silence. 1 year since badge numbers were retired and apologies were issued with trembling voices. 1 year since Memphis had changed its course, and maybe the country too. But I wasn't done yet. I never would be. They held a ceremony that afternoon at the Spectre Center, now fully operational, filled with staff lawyers, therapists, and counselors for those who had been silenced. Ava was now its director. Leo ran the litigation wing, and Malik, he walked on stage in full uniform, navy blue, seal trident freshly pinned. At 18, he'd completed the impossible. Bud S. Combat Dive, Hell Week, and made it home still smiling. Stronger than his trauma, fiercer than his scars. He stood at the podium, thousands watching, and before saying a word he turned toward me in the front row and saluted. My throat tightened, but I stood and returned the salute slow and steady. I heard the crowd around us go quiet. They didn't need a speech. That moment was everything. The baton had passed. That night, we held a dinner for survivors and families of the B-15 list. They came from all over the country, now drawn by hope, drawn by something real. We sat under string lights, shared cornbread, and catfish past plates and stories. No tears that night. Only laughter. Only legacy. Ava tapped a glass for silence and then read the new list. 54 officers removed across 8 states. 27 new federal oversight investigations launched. 300 survivor cases opened. 4 states passed Spectre-inspired legislation. 1 movement that would not die. I didn't say anything. I just sat in it. The warmth, the fight, the endurance. It had all been worth it. As the crowd thinned, Leo sat next to me a little slower, now knees cracking like mine. "You ready to rest?" he asked. I looked up at the stars. "No, but I'm ready to be quiet." He chuckled. "Big difference. Biggest there is." In the weeks that followed, I wrote a book. Spectre, the War We Brought Home. Not just my story, but Terrence's, Ava's, Malik's, Gloria's, Jensen's, the list, the trials, the burn scars, the silence, the resistance. Publishers fought over it. I gave it to an indie black-owned press for free. Let the truth be handled by hands that knew what to do with it. On the day of the book launch, I visited the statue alone. I laid a single medal at its base, my last Navy Cross. I didn't need it anymore. The city had learned to see, and that was enough. A small child wandered over, looking up at the sculpture with wide eyes. He asked his mother, "Mommy, why's she kneeling?" She smiled and knelt beside him. Because sometimes heroes don't shout. They wait. And when the world finally listens, they change everything. The sun began to set. I turned, walked toward the gate, past the names etched into the black marble. Every name once silenced, now eternal. And as I stepped into the dusk, a voice behind me shouted, "Miss Briggs, Commander, wait." I turned. Malik stood there in full dress, breathless from running. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a folded flag. "James's. I found this at the center's display. It's yours." I took it gently, hands shaking just a little, and then I hugged him. Not like a soldier, not like a commander, like family. I buried that flag in my garden, next to the tomatoes James once loved, next to the roots Malik had helped replant, next to the memory of a world where I had to fight just to be seen. Because now I was. Sometimes the greatest battles don't happen on foreign soil, but on the sidewalks of our own neighborhoods. Sometimes the bravest soldier isn't the one who fires first, but the one who stands tall, silent, and refuses to be broken. Commander Eleanor Briggs didn't fight back with fists. She fought with truth. She fought with names. And she fought for a future where no one would have to wear a uniform to be treated with dignity. It's not in medals. Not in revenge. It's in legacy, in passing the torch, in turning pain into purpose, and in showing the world that age, color, or silence doesn't mean weakness. It means you've seen enough to know what matters. If this story moved, you don't just watch. Stand up. Speak out. Comment below with the line that hit you hardest, or share the name of someone who inspired you to never back down. Subscribe for more real stories of courage, justice, and redemption told like never before. And don't forget to turn on the bell, because every week we reveal a truth someone tried to bury. You were never meant to stay quiet. Let's make noise, together.